Mindset Podcast. We're your guide as you make your way through life, getting better 1% every day. We believe that life is lived and true victory won through adversity. Nothing easy is ever worth it.
Doug, what's up?
How you doing?
Good, man. I'm happy to have gotten you in here.
It was a shock and quite the honor when you reached out.
Was it?
Yes, it was.
Wow. I appreciate it.
Because I listened to the podcast and, I was thinking about, I was like, these guys are experts that he's talking to, and I wouldn't consider myself an expert on anything.
Well,
so
I consider you an expert.
I appreciate that.
So Doug taught me the laws, the ins and outs for my CWP in the state of South Carolina. That's not how I first met you, but that's what my memory of your expertise is, and then have learned about you over the years, I guess. We also train under the same sensei. We have the same sensei, which is cool, which is, we're like karate brothers.
Yep.
We've built the same stage,
which is coming up in a couple weeks.
Yeah. So, but I wanted to get you on. I wanted to hear your story, man. I wanted to hear where it started. I know that you taught me my CWP. I know that you were in the Air Force. I know that you are involved in police and firefighter, and you taught SWAT.
I did.
And you've done some other cool ass things. So let's start there. Let's start with,
like I was telling you, I guess I don't really think of myself as anything special. I just know that I've gotten to do some interesting jobs during my whole career. And, when I was a teenager, my dad was in the Air Force. And so we moved around with the Air Force, and I got to know that. But he also, when he retired, became a police officer.
It's a family affair.
Correct. And to get more involved with him and to be able to spend time with him, I joined the Explorers with his department, and that's where I got hooked. So I decided I want to do law enforcement no matter what.
Okay.
But you can't do that at 18. You have to wait till you're 21. So I figured the Air Force would be a great way to go. So I joined the Air Force as security forces, which is essentially military police for the Air Force.
So police has been in your blood since
it has. Yeah.
Early.
I got hooked really early into it. So
what about it? I mean, what about it? Why?
Through high school, I was kind of a nerd, I guess you'd say. I did a lot of puzzles. I just really enjoyed puzzles and figuring things out. And so I always wanted to be an investigator, and that was my goal. Investigator. And so I told myself I'd do the 4 years, get out, get it with the department, and work my way up. Well, 4 years ended up being 8 years, and so I finally got out after that. But when I got in the Air Force, I realized that, yes, it's a military police job, but the first 6 weeks of your security forces training is essentially Army infantry training.
Okay.
I've never been to Army infantry, so I don't know how alike they are, but we do a lot of the patrolling. I was a machine gunner because at that point, unfortunately, I couldn't shoot. I'd never shot before, really. And so
that's shocking to hear.
It is. And so Air Force basic training doesn't require firearms qualification. So it was familiarization.
Yeah.
And so that's the only reason. If they'd required it, I may have had some issues getting out of basic training just because of that. But so when I got to tech school, they made me a machine gunner.
Okay.
So I was a saw gunner for a while, and then ended up being a 60 gunner, and that's why I deployed as a 60 gunner.
Okay. Where'd you deploy?
Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
Escom Village, downtown Saudi Arabia.
Ooh, all right.
In Riyadh.
Okay.
It was interesting. It was pre 9/11, but it was right after the Cole bombing, the USS Cole. So we deployed there. We were already slated, but then we had some other individuals go with us.
On your toes,
plus up. Yeah. We had some, nothing really dramatic there. We had some people testing the perimeters, had some people roll up in vehicles we thought were vehicle explosives.
Oh, wow. Right.
And we were partnered with the Saudi Arabian forces, so they'd respond out there. We had FBI with us; they'd get involved. So, we were there for a little over 3 months during Thanksgiving. We got there right before Thanksgiving and got home like February 26th of 2020.
Okay.
So, after that, which I guess I had originally received orders here to Shaw. So when I graduated tech school, I was coming to Shaw.
All right.
And then about 2 months before I finished, this Chief Master Sergeant came down and showed us this great video saying, "Hey, we need people to come guard Air Force One." It was a little over 300 people applied, but once you go through the paperwork for your security clearance, that knocked a lot of people down, and they end up picking up 50 of us to take to Andrews. Normally for that unit, you have to be on your second enlistment. So you have to finish 4 years, re-enlist, and now that you're eligible. But I guess they were hurting for security clearances. because a lot of people can get top secret clearances, but the clearance you need, the White House clearance you need, is what's difficult for everybody.
A little more than top secret.
If you've had foreclosures, if you've had
credit
cards you're behind on, that automatically disqualifies you.
Well, that makes sense because you're in a state of leverage, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
So 50 of us got hired, and then by the time we got there, we were down to like 30 because people were dropping like crazy.
Okay.
So that was very interesting. It took about 8 months for the security clearance to come back, and then they move you directly on in there, and now you're stuck.
So what'd you do guarding Air Force One?
So our unit is essentially the ones that guard the plane.
Mm-hmm.
No matter where it is, we have people that fly with the plane.
Okay.
But we also have us that guard it there in the hangar whenever it's there at Andrews. We're also the ones without clearances focus in on like vice presidential planes, congressmen, congressional planes. And for most of us, it was the Air Force One hangar. After you're there for a little while, you actually get additional clearances that have to do with continuity of government, evacuation procedures.
Oh, okay.
So that's what we were responsible for as well. They take out of everybody they have with the Air Force One clearance, you then get reduced down to a select few that get that clearance. And they're limited on number of clearances for that because they want to minimize who has access to it. So you have to wait till somebody else leaves and then you can get promoted there. So it was pretty interesting.
Now, how close to, say, Secret Service are you interacting with them and stuff at that point?
We did a lot during, when somebody's coming and going and during missions. There were times like President Reagan's state funeral where there were about 10 of us that were assigned to Secret Service full time for that week because we also had the G8 summit at the same time. So all the foreign dignitaries.
Yeah, I remember that.
All the foreign dignitaries had their planes right there as well. So every time one of the dignitaries came and went, or anytime we were dealing with President Reagan and Nancy Reagan, pretty much for that week, we worked about 20-hour days.
Wow.
With everybody coming and going. So we were integrated with them quite a bit. We had a specialized detail team that's all they did. That was their primary job because we also did other things too. But we did have a lot of interaction and involvement. Cool. Because of our clearance. So I was on the basis SWAT team after I got back from Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, I was gonna say, how do you get from that telling me that you don't know anything about guns basically to?
Well, I got back from Saudi Arabia and they were having a Air Force wide shooting competition.
Okay.
The team we were sending from Andrews was short one person. And I knew the guys on the team and they're like, "Hey, you want to try out?" I was like, "I can't shoot." They're like, "Come on.
We'll show you." Okay.
So there's a guy, we used to call him Cadam God. Cadam is combat arms training and maintenance.
Okay.
But everything about firearms he knows. And he had won that competition at the Air Force level so many times that he couldn't go back. He'd maxed out the number of times he could compete. And he was our trainer.
Crap.
So for 3 months, I got released from duty and we shot every day. Or actually, we started off at 8 a.m. in the gym.
Okay.
Worked out till 10, ran till about 12. And then we did shooting all afternoon.
What?
That was it. 3 months. Of course, there were days we'd go out to long distance range because you had to shoot iron sight out to 500. And then we would do obstacle courses because the competition was a pistol shooting competition, rifle shooting competition, combat scenario, a law enforcement scenario, and a day of the obstacle course.
Whoa.
And so you competed at each one of those levels.
So how old were you at this point?
18, maybe 19, just barely 19. But no, that guy, John Kraski, took me under his wing and he would literally stand there and watch me shoot and stare at it. All right, move here. I'd shoot.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay, do this.
Yeah.
And so I went and because of that, and that's why I'm such a big proponent of dry fire training with firearms.
Okay.
Not out at the range, but at home practicing the techniques.
Okay.
Because he did that. And I literally went from not being able to shoot to taking 3rd place overall in the entire competition.
That's legit. Okay.
All because of his dedication to me.
Yeah.
And that's where I learned a lot of my tactics.
Okay.
So after that, when I got done with that, I was in such great shape as well that they had SWAT tryouts like a month later. So
and you're like, oh, I'm a shoe-in for this.
I did. So I made it first time around. And it was interesting because we're the SWAT team for the base. But, we have other locations within the DC area that don't have full-time teams. So we were also responsible for anything in the military district of Washington that couldn't establish its own team.
Okay.
So.
Wow.
That you got access to a lot of stuff then because of that.
That's sort of like, that's kind of like special training.
Well, we got to train, you've heard of the FBI HRT. They have that. But the larger field offices like Washington, D.C., New York, they have their own SWAT teams.
Right.
And so
I've seen that in movies.
So a lot of people, they're like, they don't have SWAT, they have HRT. No, they have SWAT teams too.
Okay.
They're local field offices. And we got to train a lot with them.
That's cool.
Because we had the range. So they would just, hey, if you let us come on the range. And
that's how it works.
So,
that's how it works.
So luckily in that position, they offered us all kinds of different training. And so I got to go to the Army's SRT school, Special Response Team school, where you do a lot of live fire, building training, building clearing. And then sniper schools, we had access to sniper schools too. I graduated from HHS International and an Air Force level training that we did as well for sniper training. And so because of that, we got integrated with a lot of different agencies on a lot of different things.
Right, because they just need manpower at some point.
The manpower plus the clearance.
Yeah. The clearance is the magic too.
That's the big aspect behind it, because we were put on protective details that they wouldn't let anybody else other than that. You remember Jessica Lynch?
Yes.
Okay. Well, the Iraqi doctor that had notified us of where she was at, where she was located, so we could retrieve her, the U.S. gave him and his family political asylum.
Got you. But somebody's got to get him out of there, protect him.
And they had a bounty on their head. So we did a 3-day mission protecting them.
Right.
Myself and the guy I talked about, Cadam God, were on rifles alternating about every hour so we didn't get fatigued.
Wow. For
3 days we were out there. And then we had an entry team there stationed as well to protect them firsthand. So we got to do a lot of different things like that. There were other agencies that came and went from base, and we had to do protective details for people they had in their custody and people they were working with from other agencies. And so there were a lot of interesting things I got to do. And some of them we may never be able to talk about.
Sure.
Especially with some of the continuity of government things.
Yeah.
But when I sit back and think about some of those things, it's like, wow, it was a really interesting job.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. But you're not a specialist though.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
I was fortunate enough to go teach at the range for full-time for a year. I never went to combat arms school, but I was able to go over there and teach based on what I had been taught by them. And so you would have one of the actual CADM certified guys running the range, but then individually one-on-one, we're with the students and we were teaching them. So got to do that full-time instructor for a year as well.
That's legit, man.
That's where I learned. And I guess I gained the passion then for teaching the firearms, because to see people go from what I was with, nervous about firearms, close their eyes every time they pull the trigger, to now having the confidence to be able to protect themselves and defend themselves. That's kind of where I got that itch of I need to teach this stuff. So
wow. So how do you go from that, basically doing all that for the military, but doing it like, I don't suppose you call another police officer civilian, but essentially the civilian population?
Unfortunately, teaching the firearms aspect is not much different.
Okay.
Because there's a qualification at the academy, and we maintain a similar qualification, but there's a lot of officers there that still barely qualify, still hesitant and afraid. And it's because, guys like me, you're interested in firearms, you take that on, you want to learn. A lot of people don't. They're like, I just, whatever I need to do to get my qualification, that's it. So it's still kind of difficult teaching police officers sometimes.
They're just like everybody else.
Right.
I mean, you can't make people get more certifications at work or whatever. Even if you work at a computer, I mean, you can't make them. I mean, I guess you could.
That's kind of a difficult aspect on the firearms instructors too, because if they're involved in an incident later on, you sit back and think, is there anything I could have done differently? And yes, you're presenting the information, but everybody learns differently. Did I not present it in a manner, or did they just not care? So you never know. And that kind of sits with you sometimes.
You take ownership of that. It's going to bother you.
It is. That's why I'm a big Jocko fan. I know you are about extreme ownership, but then sometimes that extreme ownership can kind of mess you up a little bit.
It really can.
Could I have done something different? So.
I think so. Particularly, I mean, I'm sure if you're a fan of his, you heard his story where he comes up with that, with the blue on blue incident or whatever, like even something like that. I mean, you carry that the rest of your life. You do. I mean, that's not, that's not really a workable situation, I guess, for you personally. So is there more there between the transition? I mean,
I got to compete another time in there.
Okay.
We did a lot. We got integrated with FBI on a nationwide exercise on nuclear response. And essentially what they did is they brought a nuclear weapon to the base. And then they told, the government agencies, hey, there's a nuclear weapon somewhere in the United States. And they gave a scenario of a timeline. And so they had to do whatever they do on the back end to actually locate where it was. And then we integrated with the FBI, which I know in real life that there'd be higher up people, higher than us doing the attack or the recovery. But it was interesting. You learned a lot on exercises like that. Even the FBI SWAT teams that had tactics and techniques that they hadn't shown us, but during those scenarios, we were able to respond and work with them. And so I got to learn a lot during those scenarios and different missions.
Let me ask you this though. I was before we met today, I was talking with another friend of mine about martial arts and stuff. We were having a similar conversation that talking about learning. So you've got a scenario you're running, you've got tactics that you've trained, that you've thought about, but then you get into the scenario and it doesn't work.
Right.
I mean, so what are some of the things that you do when it doesn't work? And then how do you learn from that as a tactical organization?
I try to pull from some of my experiences, some of them in real life that didn't go well, and some of them are from training exercises. But if something doesn't work for you, then you got to figure out how to adapt. You got to figure out how to include that into your training after that point. Like I've had scenarios where I've had to wrestle a guy with a gun on the road as a police officer. And when I grabbed onto him, I pinned the gun against his body.
Yeah.
Well, I pinned it with my left hand, and I'm left-handed, so I couldn't get to my gun.
Right.
So, and at that point, I didn't carry a knife on my weak side, my right side. So I learned after that, have something you can access on both sides as a defensive. If you can't use, let's say you get hurt, injured, shot on one arm, you still got to be able to use, defend yourself and use something that you have. So it's just taking scenarios and analyzing them. As a police officer, I was big on going back and watching my not body cam then, but dash cam videos.
Really?
That's when I started learning a lot about body language. After I was involved in an incident, why didn't I see this happening? And you go back and watch, and you'll see certain subtle movements people are doing.
Right.
So it is each time, even if it's just a civilian, taking a chance or taking the time afterwards to look back at it and say, hey, what could I have done differently? Where can I improve? Are there different things I could use? Even from concealed carry, did the position in which you're carrying it, was it advantageous? Was it not?
Right.
Is there a better way to do it?
True. Yeah. Because sometimes people, they just put it wherever, wherever they saw on TV or they read on the internet or whatever, but they never actually try it.
You see a lot of people, it's cool to carry the shoulder holsters, but they're not very practical.
Yeah, you got to get to it.
Especially when you're in a close range, you're not going to be able to get to that firearm and draw it.
I did some, so I've been training jiu-jitsu for a while, and we did some stuff for fun where we got like Darren, he's been on the show a couple of times. He gave me like a tactical holster thing, and I've got like a trainer gun stuck in there, and we were just like, all right, try to like not let me get the gun or whatever, and vice versa. And it was like everything that I thought just like immediately went out of the window.
Right. And when you take a lot of stuff and put it into practice, you realize that you sometimes need to expand on that too.
Yeah.
It's taught in the police academy. A lot of people talk about that Tula rule of 21 feet.
Yeah.
We found you got to push it out to at least 30 feet for that to work.
Interesting.
And what that rule is essentially that if I see an attacker and he's not at least 30 feet away, he can get to me and hurt me with a knife before I can draw and engage him.
Yeah, I've tried that drill, and
So I like to teach that's, yes, you want to use that 30-foot rule, but that's also not just drawing and defending yourself. That's think of actions like if I'm in a parking lot, can I put a vehicle between us to extend that time frame?
Right.
It's things like that you got to think of and add to your training. And is the situational awareness and knowing what's around you that you can use for cover if need be.
I think about all that training, man. I mean, that's just like, this is one of the things I love about martial arts, right? It's like you can't bullshit it. You know what I mean? Like you can to a certain degree, but when it comes down to practice, it's like you can see it. You can either make it work or you can't make it work.
Right.
And I love that aspect of it. But, and then there's that. Then there's like the reality-based martial arts people. And I mean, if you're listening to this and you're one of those, you should probably check yourself. But like, and it's like, so how do you actually train your reality-based thing? Like, I don't know how you train
too, because you don't want to hurt the person you're training with.
Yeah. Like,
and as a training partner, it's got to be a give and take where I'm allowing you to do certain things so you can learn the technique and not trying to be the tough guy that you can't do this to me.
It's like, I can't. Yeah. I can't actually try to kill you.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like this is not going to work
Mhm.
because I might actually kill you and then your training's over.
Right.
It's kind of silly.
I mean, there are things you can add to your training. It gets really expensive. You start talking stuff like this, but you know, with
Yeah.
knife defense, you can add electric knives.
Yeah.
And honestly, I'd never used simunitions before. And simunitions are essentially you use your real gun. You swap
Right.
out the barrel.
Right.
So a real round can't fire through it, but you fire these little rounds that they have for simunitions. And I'd never used them until I went to the Army school, the Army Special Reaction Course.
Okay.
And then everything we did was
It's
using
awesome.
those. So when you're getting hit, you
It
know
hurts.
it hurts. Especially it was about 2 feet of snow when I was there. So your
Okay.
hands are cold when you get
Oh,
shot. It
God.
hurts. But your training changes when you know you can't get hit, and
Yeah.
it becomes realistic.
That's
Not
right.
a bunch of people just saying, "Hey, I shot you." No, you didn't.
Mhm.
It's
100%.
when you bring in that reality.
Mhm.
That's
Yep.
a big thing with
Yep.
learning to train. You won't stick your head out when you should, and you won't, rush around the
I
corner
agree.
without checking
Yep.
it first.
Yep. When you get hit in the face a couple times, you understand how to block your
It
face.
is.
For sure. So all right. So we've got you military, but where does your civilian police career start?
So when I got out, I started applying different agencies, and I'd been offered a job at another agency,
Mhm.
but I settled in at Casey.
Okay.
I wanted something. I've been doing basically security for 8 years,
Right.
and I want something that's more active, learning the road in the process. And the agency that I was offered a job with wanted my background to do security for a federal location here in Columbia.
Okay.
And so I didn't accept that position because of that, but I ended up going to Casey, and
Okay.
which Casey is public safety, or was back then. It's not anymore. And with public safety, you have to be police and fire certified.
Wow.
You have to do both.
I didn't know that.
Mhm.
You say back then, when was that?
They changed, and they separated either December of 2020 or
Okay.
January 2021. Other than that, their entire career, you had to do both.
Wow. Is that unique?
There's several agencies around the state
Okay.
that still do it. Clinton, I know for sure does that. And there's a few others, North Augusta.
It kind of makes sense if you're in
Aiken.
a smaller town or whatever,
It
but
is.
Casey seems big enough to.
It is now. They definitely have it. But
Okay.
the way they ran it back then was you had 2 dedicated firefighters with the truck. Well, they have to be your scene commander and run your truck.
Oh man.
So your patrol officers are your firefighters.
Right.
And then you send out an all page and get people in.
Huh.
So when I got to Casey, I went straight to learning the fire academy,
Okay.
because it took time to get into the police academy. So I went to the fire academy, got certified, was in the firehouse full time for a while. And then I went to the academy, came back, and was sent to patrol. So
Wow, man.
I was there for it was over 5 years, just before 6 years in patrol. I worked my way up to a shift corporal, and we were doing the SWAT team thing then too. So it was fun. We got to do a lot of training with local agencies.
Wow. That's impressive, man.
I tried my best during that time frame to get as much training as possible, because my goal was still always getting investigations, but there's a lot you can learn even from there on the road, as you're learning
Sure.
how people think, how people act. Or like me, I had several instances where things could have turned really bad. So I went back and watched my videos to see the body language and really learn that.
Yeah.
And that's an aspect you can take into investigations, learning how people act, especially with interviews and interrogations, how their body movements are, their micro expressions, things you can learn from that. So I went there. I was at Pine Ridge for about 1.5 years. I had a friend of mine that went over and took over as chief, and I went over there to help him with some things, getting some things straightened out. But my goal was always investigations. And someone I had previously worked was my supervisor at Casey, was the now chief at the Attorney General's office in the Medicaid fraud unit.
Okay.
And so I interviewed there, got the position, and I moved up there as basically a fraud investigator. But our end was investigating the doctors and Medicaid providers. So those that were billing for services not rendered, or upscaling some of the billing codes to get more money.
So what was it about investigations that you're interested in?
It's pretty much the puzzles.
I was thinking it's like solving a puzzle,
figuring things out, paying attention. The attention to detail was something I've always been good at with that. So it was just what I felt was my calling. Although when I first got there, when you start looking at the Medicaid aspect of it and the
you're like
financial crimes aspect, I'm like, did I make the right choice?
I'm not an
here?
accountant, man.
Well, luckily we had auditors assigned. So essentially the way we work cases up there, you had an attorney, an investigator, and an auditor on every case. So a lot of the data could be collected, or was collected by the auditors, and the attorneys just basically guided us. They were It was fortunate. It was really nice how they operated it. I had autonomy. I could go investigate my cases how I wanted. Just once a week, we'd come back and meet up on the status of the case.
Right. Compare notes, whatever.
But then they realized my security clearance was still active. So we started getting a lot of cases that we were going to take federal, which federal required the clearance.
Okay. So like conveniently.
It is. So I started getting all those cases working with federal OIG investigating.
Man. Okay.
Federal OIG is essentially the agency that investigates other federal agencies. But they also handle the Medicaid side of the house too on the federal side, because 70% of Medicaid is provided by the federal government,
right,
and then 30% from the state. So we split that up, and so we work jointly together on a lot of cases.
Yeah, if somebody's frauding the state, they're probably frauding the federal government too.
It is.
Yeah.
We had cases where you got to kind of take it personally more than just the financial aspect, because now these companies aren't providing the services to people that they should. Especially with one of my cases, it was autism related. So these kids with autism weren't getting the services they were supposed to get, but the company was still getting paid and sending people on trips and getting cars and watches. And so those are the ones you kind of take
piss a lot of people off.
It is.
Yeah.
That one we ended up settling on $8.9 million, and the VP, we tied it all the way back up to the VP of the company.
Wow.
So
it seems like I remember that story in the news, but I'm drawing a blank on the specifics, but I remember hearing something about that. One time, this is the IRS though. Like, I worked for this guy this was back during like video poker days in the state. I worked for this guy as a web developer, and we had went out of business. He tricked us out of a bunch of money and stuff, whatever. But like, this is like 5 years later. I'm sitting at home, and you're a police officer. You know the way you knock on a door. I got the police officer knocking on a door, and I look to the people, and I'm like, those guys are in blue blazers. Like, what the hell? So I open the door, and they're like, IRS, whatever. And the guy, I kind of see his gun. IRS, can we come in? And I'm like, what in the hell is happening? They wanted to ask me about my history with this guy, like where was he and all this stuff. But I was like, the IRS carries guns. What is happening? But that was my first run-in with like investigators investigating like fraud and stuff.
Of course, I've never been audited or investigated from the IRS, but the IRS actually has their auditors, but they have a law enforcement division.
If they show up with guns, I don't want to be audited either.
Right. But I found they were very down to earth and very understanding.
These guys were super cool when they were asking me questions. But
I got to work one federal case with them, and that was because we actually were able to show the money he was stealing, he was sending overseas.
Gotcha.
So they got involved.
Yeah, had to catch it. I'm always fascinated by the different government, I don't want entities or whatever that have their own like units like that. It's always fascinating that there'll be this big thing, but there's always these specialists inside there that do, like SWAT or whatever it is. And you're just like, what is going on there? But there's always, there's a real reason. And then you're like, I got to hear those stories,
Yeah. For the most part, those are developed over necessity.
Yeah. That's,
obviously
what it looks like.
There's some waste and abuse with our government, but.
Well, sure. But, IRS guy with a gun, there's got to be a reason he's got that, man.
He does. Because they're the ones that are going out and doing the criminal aspect of it.
Yeah.
So that was the only case I got to work with them on. I've reached out to them in the, outside of that, and they've helped me out with cases.
That's cool.
But yeah, they were always very, very pleasant to work with, actually.
How long did you do that?
I promised the AG's office 2 years, so I did that. I did my 2 years.
Okay.
It's, to some extent, it's kind of difficult. Like I said, I had autonomy to be able to go out and do my investigation as I pleased. But the way it works legally is we are an arm of the attorneys.
Oh,
so
sure.
We're very limited on what we can do.
Sure.
There were things, if I'm out and I actually see something going on, I'm basically a civilian that can report it. Even though I have a gun on my hip, I'm not allowed to react.
Right.
And I was in North Charleston interviewing some people, and there was something that happened there. And the perimeter guys were like, "Hey, you're a cop. Why didn't you help? Why didn't you?"
I can't.
Illegally, I can't because of my job. So I had some issues with that, and that was my biggest aspect.
Okay.
So I ended up returning to Casey, and I was there for about 6 months before I moved over to investigations full time.
Okay.
In there, I was a latent fingerprint examiner. I did crime scene. I also did the FBI. They developed a team, after the Boston bombing,
Mm-hmm.
there was so much video that had to be collected, and there are only so many agents that could do it. They developed what they call the digital image and video recovery team,
Okay.
divert. And so they go around training local police departments on how to extract the videos, because
Sure.
if you have a surveillance system, you can plug in a thumb drive, download it. Well, it's altered it. The second you do that, it's altered the video.
Really?
So you actually have to go in and extract the original video.
In what way? What do you mean?
Every video system is going to have its proprietary player.
Oh,
And
I got you. I got like fidelity or
right.
sound or whatever.
Right.
Sure.
And if it's not that specific player,
right.
then the second you watch it somewhere else, it
right.
could be slowed down. It
right.
could have dropped frames.
Right.
So they train you on how to extract that properly, so you get the best and most accurate.
That makes sense.
And so essentially the reason they were doing that is if you have something happen, then you can call upon all these different agencies. Hey, we need videos from here, 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 and here.
Right.
So I'd never seen it in use until our Face Wetlick case.
Okay.
So with Face Wetlick.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was the first time I actually saw it used, because we had so much video to collect that I was dedicated to the actual headquarters with the videos.
Right.
And we would send those people from other agencies that we relied on them because they'd been through the same training I've been to. They went out, collected the videos and brought it back to us so we could analyze all the video.
Wow.
And that was key aspects there of making sure, because not every time does it give a timestamp, things like that. So you can narrow down locations and time. So it was very important for them to collect the most accurate, video footage we could. So
remind me, how much time did that take between when she was reported missing and you guys closed it? I mean,
she was closing the case, finding her.
You know what I meant?
Because closing the case was a while.
Yeah. Sorry.
So it was a Monday night. It was February 10th.
Right.
Is when she was reported missing.
Right.
I was actually at the grocery store when I got the initial message on it, and that's something that no one in our agency had ever dealt with before. So
I remember reading or hearing that it was like this in the whole. All of Casey, if you're listening to this from somewhere else, it's Columbia where we are. It's not really even a medium-sized city, but let's just say it's a medium-sized city. Casey's like kind of the outskirts of it. It's still a small town. I mean, from what I understood, it was like and I live in Casey. Well, I live in West Columbia, but Springdale, it's all the same, pretty like close. Little area. But I remember like, yeah, this is new. Like, this is something that the whole community, we've never experienced this.
Right. So it was something that even as police officers, none of us had ever experienced. So I have to go ahead and give credit to the chief. I didn't find this out till later on because I was very involved with the FBI on this. Okay. And we met with the FBI afterwards to go over the whole case. And that's when they told us that there are a lot of agencies that turn down their help, will not accept help from federal agencies during something like this. And
that was on TV.
That was ridiculous to me.
Yeah.
And so I have to say, I'm very thankful for the chief. He realized very quickly that this was probably going to be outside of what we can handle ourselves. And it was probably within 3 hours the FBI was there. By the next morning, we had agents from all over the U.S. It's their response team show up. So she was taken Monday afternoon, and we ended up finding her Thursday morning.
Yeah.
So that's the time frame of the turnaround on it. But
there's so much to that, though. Like, I mean, I don't know how to say it. I mean, but like the arrogance or the ego of someone who's running that crew who doesn't want that help. Mm-hmm. I mean, to the point of solving that one way or another for the parents to at least understand and know what the status of this whole thing is. Right. And but your ego is going to be the thing to say, like, we don't need help.
Right. And I can't stand that. That makes no sense to me.
It's crazy.
You have a child that's missing. There should be no question. You'll take whatever help you can get.
We're all on the same team. I mean,
and that's where we have to give credit there, is that him not being that way, he accepted so much help that we locked down that entire subdivision.
Yeah.
And that is where we believe that he wasn't able to remove her from the subdivision.
Right.
And I don't know how I'd deal with it if he had managed to, and we never had an answer.
All because you were like,
right.
Well, we don't need to talk to the FBI.
Right.
We got this. Meanwhile, we don't know what the hell we're doing,
We don't.
Yeah.
There was one thing we never knew about, like I told you about the divert team. Apparently they have one for the child abduction response team as well. Okay. We weren't aware of that, so we never sent anybody to any training on that aspect. I wish we had. We could have been a little bit more prepared.
Sure.
But they came in and they brought so much information with them. They brought pre-planned forms that are written by, the behavioral health unit of the FBI.
Wow.
So they
Wow.
know exactly what questions to ask, and you can analyze it. But then we've set up command posts because at Casey being fire, we were swift order rescue, we were confined space rescue,
all that stuff,
high angle. So we've done command centers before, but the things you have to do for something like this were things that we hadn't even thought about.
Sure.
They came in and we set up, an intel, the phone calls, the tip line.
Yeah.
Then they would go to operations, be sent out and then brought back. And then we had us on the video side of it. Literally we had the sticky notes, the large poster sticky notes. We had them all over the wall with different information on it. And we literally made contact with every single person in that subdivision. And we made contact with every vehicle that came and went from that subdivision. It's a pretty secluded subdivision. There's only 3 entrances to it.
It's not far from my house, actually.
Right. There's only 3 entrances to it. So we were able to lock it down, and we literally spoke with everybody coming and going from that subdivision.
Wow.
So, and
even if it's a small subdivision, that's a large coordinated effort.
Right.
With details of things that you've never done before. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But we have to be thankful for the other agencies, because when we showed up Tuesday morning, that next morning, I mean, there were officers from all over the state lined up out of headquarters trying to offer their help. So we didn't have any issues with getting people to go out and do interviews. Yeah. We followed up on every single tip that was given to us. Even where someone miles away down 302 had a video of a red car going to the dump during that time frame. So we went, collected video from the dump, tracked the trash.
Put it all together.
Yeah, we went and did everything. That we could to find that little girl.
Yeah, imagine starting from square zero. Like, how do we even look at this stuff to much less collecting it?
Right. I mean, you have to do everything like ruling out family members.
Sure.
So the mom's boyfriend, I literally went, because Columbia has traffic cameras all over the place.
Right.
So we literally tracked him from his work. I had him at every intersection all the way home. We were able to track and show that there was no way he'd be involved with it.
Yeah.
Had to locate the father and, of course, verify his alibi and, where he was.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there was a lot of help, and we did a lot that day.
And you did it fast. Mm-hmm. You did it very fast.
FBI brought in tag readers, which most people didn't know and didn't see.
Right.
And they mounted them. So we were able to get every vehicle coming and going. So FBI brought a lot to it. And I've worked with a lot of federal agencies I've seen. And so I like to say this too, is that it's not like you see in the movies where there's that animosity between local agencies and federal agencies.
Yeah.
I've never had that. Not once.
It doesn't seem real. Yes.
I'm sure there are some arrogant FBI agents or federal agents out there, but my experience, we've never had any issues with federal agencies. So it was a very mellow interaction, very supportive on both sides.
Right.
The other aspect about support, you talked about the community and something that we've never had before. This is where the FBI said they've never been to a scene like this before, where they're normally struggling. Hey, can I get time, or can somebody go run and get food?
Oh, and everybody was pitching in.
Yes, there was so much food that the FBI agents were like, I'm actually probably going to leave here gaining weight.
You're like, welcome to the South. Welcome to how we do things in the South.
So the community the outpouring from community was amazing.
Well, yeah, I think one of the things you get in, just generalizing here, but in the South too. I mean, everywhere's different, but you're going to get the support for law enforcement too here. We're, everybody in that neighborhood is like, we want this solved too, so they're going to help you out.
We had one person give us a little bit of hard
time,
but like outside of that, the entire rest of the community was there and supportive.
You're always going to get that.
So we did everything. We brought in dogs. We did a lot of searching. We're able to now afterwards go back and pull video that kind of give us a little bit better of understanding of a timeline. But that morning, because that morning was trash day on the 30th.
Right.
Or not 30th, 13th. And so we had the firefighters, the search and rescue teams were searching all of the trash. Mm-hmm. And that morning, part of my video forensics aspect of the job was I also did what we call crime commercials. You put together things to publish out on social media, help locate.
Sure.
That's how we located a lot of the vehicles that came and went. And I was working on one that day. They were hoping to use letters written by her classmates, publishing them and hoping that would bring somebody forward. So I was actually making a video that day after reading and photographing all those letters. And I got a phone call saying, hey, you need to get down there. Because this is when I was in crime scene.
Okay.
So I get down there and they're like, hey, we found this bag that has trash in it, and we found some questionable things inside there and want you to take a look at it. As soon as I opened it up, my heart just sank. It just sank because it was one of her boots inside the trash. There were some other things in there. There was a knife and a soup ladle, but they were both just covered in dirt. That's where a lot of people were questioning, well, why is it the chief found her? It's because he was standing over me while we were processing this. And as soon as he saw the dirt on those items, he just went walking. So he walked in the woods. That day was very, very hectic after that because I remember, and I won't say the guy's name, the suspect. I just don't think he deserves that honor. And so I remember watching the roommate. I didn't know who he was, but I watched him walk past and he went to the house. And it was probably maybe 3 minutes later, he comes running around the back of the house yelling. I couldn't hear. And then the FBI agent said, "Hey, somebody's back here hurt." And so I walked around the back, and that's when we found the suspect there. He had actually committed suicide. He saw, best we can guess is he saw us out there processing the trash. He thought that.
He figured it out. Yeah.
Especially since now knowing afterwards that he made zero attempt to cover up any DNA, anything like that. Because there was, DNA collected on everything.
Right.
And then that's about the time the chief found the gravesite.
Right.
And I don't know if he was intending on us to make it easier on us to find her because he had guilt or what, but he had actually put the other boot on top of the grave. That's how the chief found it.
Yeah, clearly. Yeah.
So that's when everything slowed down after that. But
right.
It was a long day after that. And, I've seen a lot of bad things in my career, both military and law enforcement and firefighting. But that day that stands out and will always stand out in my mind. It's my only child fatality that wasn't natural. I've worked and I've been to autopsies.
Right.
But normally the child is some sort of medical condition. They've passed. But this one, it's, sitting there with her, and I had a few other investigators with me. And I know that all of the investigators I worked with would have stayed there with me had they had the chance, but they were at other crime scenes because we now had 3. We had, I ended up being 4 total, but we had all the crime scenes and they were spread out all over. But it wasn't long after we found her that it started pouring down rain. And a lot of the higher ups from other agencies, not ours, but from other agencies that were around, took off running because of the rain. And there were 2 officers that stayed with me. One's now working at SLED, so I won't name his name, but then another guy still at Casey. They stayed with me, and we stayed there through the pouring rain for about 20 minutes because she didn't deserve to be left there.
I'm not going to leave her there.
Yeah. So luckily it lightened up about 15 minutes later, and we were able to recover her. And there was a lot of evidence. What we found is the night before he started trying to dig the grave, and it was so the dirt was so compacted that he wasn't able to dig very well. So he actually went to Walmart, bought a bunch of potting soil, and brought it back home, and that's what she was covered up with. And so we processed all that, and then myself and one SLED agent from crime scene went to the coroner's office and physically processed her for evidence, DNA collection. And what I try to remember the most and kind of brings, a little bit of calm and peace to me is that when I was processing and doing the fingerprinting, I actually got to sit there and hold her hand. So it was kind of a peaceful time for me to, it's kind of difficult because her hand was only that big. It really just, when you put my finger inside her fingers. Yeah. But that was the time to spend with her. And, I guess my piece to be able to be better off with it. And so a lot of people question about whether he did it or not, or whether his roommate was involved or not. And I can tell you 100% that the way I felt, if I was not 100% confident in that, I'd still be looking. I'd still be trying to collect evidence. And so I have no doubt that he was the only one involved, and I have no doubt that he did it. So, I mean, so
how do you feel about the fact that he took his own life?
It's one of those things that are difficult because, as a police officer, you don't want to ever have to use deadly force, but in something like that, you're like, God, why did he do it himself? Why couldn't we send him off to jail? Why couldn't we, because life in jail wouldn't have been too easy for him.
No, I've heard things about particularly people that do things against children in jail. They don't really have a good life.
So it is a little bit difficult, and it opens or leaves open a lot of questions that we'll never be able to answer. Best we can do is just kind of put the pieces together, but I can guarantee anybody that's looked into the case that I have zero doubt that he was the one. If I had any doubt, I'd still be looking, trying to get answers. And that's why I know that it would have been very difficult had we not locked down that entire area as soon as it happened, and he'd actually gotten
Well, he
her
would have
away.
totally gotten out of there. Yeah.
And then we'd never have answers. I think that would have been hard for a lot of people.
So what was it that enabled you guys to work so quickly though? Like I mean, you're saying that you were able to shut down the neighborhood quickly. I mean, what was it that enabled you to do that?
Well, when you're in that area, we actually share a lot of the radio channels. Well, Casey had their own, but you always listen to the other local agencies. And so as soon as calls like that come out, people just come out.
Everyone's on it. Okay.
And then as soon as we realized that, we've searched, knocked on doors and nothing was happening or no one was able to locate her. When he started sending that out, Lexington County showed up. The fire service that has their search and rescue team,
they're out there.
They showed up. I mean, every agency you can think of, we got support from.
How do you deal? This is now I'm just curious about all the details because where my brain goes. But how do you deal with like civilians that want to help? I mean, how do you? Because you can't just like, sure, buddy, go start knocking on doors. But you can't do that.
There were a lot of people that came and offered, and I guess had we not had a lot of manpower, it's something we may have done for search and rescue.
You'd have to,
things like that. But the outpouring, we were able to say, thank you. We really appreciate this, but we do have enough manpower at this time.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
I mean, the community involvement again.
Yeah.
They were.
I was
right
there. Yeah.
They were right there. So.
Yeah, I was just, as you were talking, I was like, yeah, you couldn't just like, if I was like, hey, I'm going to run over there and help you look, you couldn't just like trust that I'm cool.
Right. And that's actually some of the issues that some of the police officers I've talked to have is that they couldn't help more.
Well,
some that had specific jobs, school resource officers, things they had to be dedicated to those areas. So like, I really wish I could have gotten involved more.
Yeah.
So,
but you have a job to do in general that you have to still go do.
Right.
Yeah. Wow. It's hard to manage that, man.
It is. And that's where I became more involved with the PTSD aspect of things.
For sure.
Because I started, my wife actually, because I'd never been to counseling before. And so that next day, my wife was like, hey, you need to go see somebody. You haven't sat down in hours. You're constantly moving, constantly doing stuff. And so she's like, you need to go see somebody.
Yeah.
And so looking back on it, the agencies do a great job of after one major incident, they'll bring people in, they'll do counseling, things like that. But they don't deal with things that law enforcement firefighters deal with on a daily basis that builds up.
Right.
And for me, after all the years between the military, fire service, and law enforcement, my counselor now has pretty much said that day with Faye was the dam that had been holding back all of my emotions broke and just released everything. And so
what did that look like? You say released your emotions. I mean, what was that? It's
fine.
Ask anything you want to talk about.
And I'm actually very open about this because I'm hoping to get others involved and get people where they seek counseling before it gets to that point. Yeah. But essentially after that, I couldn't sit still. I was constantly moving. I was fortunate enough. I had another officer or another investigator. She offered to take the autopsy for me, Faye, because 2 of my children had the military ball that Saturday night when the autopsy was going to be. So that's one thing I hate it for her because she now deals with stuff from that. But I also am glad that I didn't. So it's kind of that
probably
thing
good.
I'm torn with.
Yeah.
So, I've had a lot of issues with interacting with family members since then. I have a niece that was around her age and redhead, looks very similar. So I've had a lot of issues with that. But now the biggest thing I deal with right now is hypervigilance, not just the normal situational awareness.
I've spoken to a couple of people on this show specifically about that too. They're super like they're turned on like a lot. Yeah.
So it's when it's especially when there's kids, you go into stores and parents just let their kids run around, and I can see how quickly a child can be taken.
Yeah.
And so now I feel like it's my job to watch over them while I'm there. I mean, I don't stand around and, watch them the rest of the time. That's kind of creepy. Yeah. And sometimes I do feel that way. Sometimes I'm like, oh, is somebody going to look at me weird? Yeah. And I just feel like I have to watch and make sure that somebody's not doing that. And so that's my biggest issue that I deal with right now. And so when I've talked to police officers, firefighters, we do a great job of doing as the Bulletproof Mind audio set we were talking about earlier.
It's really good.
He talks about basically having group therapy where you talk about the incident because someone may have seen or know something you don't know.
Right.
And that's good, but it's really hard to open up in that setting if you don't trust other people. Yeah. So I'm a big advocate now for counseling. Okay. And so I like to talk to officers about that and hoping that they'll get counseling to deal with things before it builds up to a breaking point after that.
Right. I mean, even in therapy that's not related to a job like that, we often seek it whenever it's like things are breaking down and my life's in shambles. I need therapy. It's like, yes, but you also needed it, 6 years before that, to be able to, utilize it better whenever you do get it.
And for some people, it's the incidents they see at work are triggering things from their past that were personal.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's something that,
look, people have issues and they didn't actually see anything terrible. It's just general life, and you have issues that you probably should get some therapy over.
Like some of the officers that were, I wish I could have been there. I wish I could have helped. I mean, they deal with that. Yeah. So,
but that comes from something.
It is
that you probably. I mean, most people don't deal with their demons. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, you just don't.
And that's why I encourage officers to put aside that macho, that ego of I don't need it. No, you need it.
Yeah.
One good example, and of course now my mind's going to go blank. Travis Howze.
Okay.
If you ever heard of Travis Howze, he does a show, a promotion that he goes around and offers to police officers, any kind of
cool
first responders. It's called the post-traumatic purpose.
Oh, I dig it.
I don't know if you remember back in 2018, but there was the big Charleston Supercenter fire where 9 firefighters were killed.
I remember that.
He was one of the firefighters that had to go recover.
We were actually just down there for some stuff with my youngest kid, and I think it was the anniversary of that. There was like a bunch of stuff going on.
Yeah. Well, he was one of the firefighters in that, and so he's actually been interviewed on the Sean Ryan show. That's when I first heard about him. But he goes around and does these full day seminars where he talks about it, and he's what I guess you imagine a man's man, and big, fit, plays sports, all that. And so he tries to use that as, hey, look, even I realized I need to go get counseling.
Hey, man.
You need to as well.
Yeah, for sure.
And counseling can be all kinds of different forms. Where my most recent is actually in the VA has a traumatic recovery or trauma recovery program.
Yeah. And
so you meet once a week, but then you have homework the rest of the time. So you're writing, you're analyzing, you are putting yourself in situations that you can work on some of the techniques and tips. So I'm in a phase now of that where I'm released from the program while we try and work on it myself and then go back and talk with the counselor again. But that's why I'm trying to be open about it, because anybody can face something and you need to be open enough to want to seek the help. You need to open up and get better and look at your situation and maybe something that drives you towards it. Because for me, what finally broke down and made me join this program is I found myself becoming more and more distant from my kids and my wife. When we would have get-togethers, I found myself getting overwhelmed. I found myself, getting uptight and not wanting to interact. Or when we're out in public, I've tried to start doing things a little bit more. Like we went to a Fireflies game the other day. I'm trying to put myself in situations where I can work on those techniques and get better. It's always, and probably always will be, a work in progress.
Right.
But that's what triggered it for me, is the fact that I was losing that with my kids and my family. And so I took on this, and even they've talked about the significant change and improvements we've seen. So I really hope that.
I love how you guys put it. I love that. It's a program I'm working on. You're working on yourself, bro.
It is.
It's all good.
It is. I guess it's the program I'm following.
I know. I love it.
What I mean
My brother's the same way. He is a policeman for a long time, and he's like, but that's what we see with him. Like, you think PTSD is like, this guy's angry all the time. No, they're just not around you.
Right.
Like they just go away.
And everybody handles it differently. They have different symptoms. And I hate that so many people think of PTSD as that angry veteran going out.
It's like this much.
Right.
Like they just, like you said, you just won't go to the baseball game with your family. And then you'll sit at home worrying about your family.
Right. And then you start separating yourself from a lot of people. You start staying home more. And especially after I retired, and now I don't have much to do. So that is compounding it, because, I kind of limit myself.
Have time to think.
Right. So those are all the things I'm working on through the program, and it's helped me significantly. I was able to analyze the scenario with Faye a lot more too, and look at different things, because I think, thankfully, I don't have a lot of things where I blame myself for a lot.
Right.
But she brought up that, and the discussions brought up other things.
Right.
That I did blame myself for, and I didn't even realize it. So it'll bring up different things. And unfortunately, people need to understand that when you start a counseling program, it's going to get worse before it gets better, because you're intentionally discussing, intentionally bringing out some of these things. Yeah. But if you stick to it and move forward, it will get better. It will
That's good advice.
Improve. So
I was just we're talking about training. I mean, we got to this point, and so far, I mean, how many years of training has this been? I mean, you said you got in the Air Force when you're 18. I mean, at what point was this? This was 2021,
No,
2019?
1999.
Okay. So, right. God, it's been that long.
It has been.
Wow.
I graduated high school and was in basic training 2 weeks later.
Right.
So
but we're talking like decades of training, right? And I was literally just training someone this morning. We were talking about, we're doing some self-defense stuff or whatever. And he started asking me questions, and I was talking about self-defense, and I was like, look, man, at some point, something I think about often when I'm in a room, and I talk about this with my sons, both my sons, I asked them, I said, do you ever just look around the room and like size everybody up, and you're like, I could take everyone in this room, like not from and when I say that, it's like, man, this guy's got a giant ego.
Right.
But what I'm saying is, like, from a standpoint of like, if some shit went sideways, like, who's going to be the person that's going to be the most trouble, and who can I help? So you start thinking about those things, and then you're like, and so I was telling this guy this morning, I was like, at some point you are responsible for it. Like, if you are in the room and you're the only one that has the skills that can see it, and you have trained, and you don't do anything, like, you're going to have trouble with that too.
That's our beliefs. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people these days that it's not my problem. And
yeah,
so
you see
it's hard to deal with.
You see the people just filming the situation, and we talked about that too. But what I'm getting at is, like, that mindset. And it was this weird, like, meta moment, because I knew I was talking to you later today, but I was like, wow, I'm actually training this guy. What's the term? Term we like to use, a sheepdog.
Oh.
You know what I mean? Like there's
the protector.
I know there's terms that are like very Instagrammy, whatever, but
Right.
I'm literally talking to this guy about being the sheepdog, and I'm telling him, this is a good thing. This is awesome. I respect you if you do this.
Right.
And you spent 25 years, I'm just throwing a number out there, with the same exact training and mindset. And then all of a sudden you're supposed to just like turn it off.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, you can't just turn that off.
You can't. And that's because in my counseling, she's like, well, as part of this is we want you to reduce that. I said, that's not.
How do I? Yeah, I'm not ever going to turn this off.
There's a balance there, and I got to find that balance, because if something happened and I feel like I could have prevented it, I'd have major issues with that. Yeah. And I know that I'm not God. I know I can't prevent everything, but if I haven't done my best to try. So that's when the situational awareness of watching people, and especially after all these years of learning body language, if you notice somebody that's sweating, fidgety, things like
and
that,
you're like, maybe
start
I can
rising,
head this off. Yeah.
Right. And so it's, even if it's just, you notice those things, you pick up a phone and get law enforcement on the way. Doing something to help better the situation. You don't have to be the hero to go out there with a gun, but if you get law enforcement on the way,
dude, I saw you. We were putting together all the stuff for the tournament that we helped with, and you're walking around with a full med kit. You know what I mean? And I'm like, damn, like it's not about shooting a bad guy. I mean, there's so many ways to think about helping people. You don't just turn that off. You don't just retire and turn it off.
And it's actually expanded. I mean, I've had so much training when it comes to using firearms, self-defense, things that can injure or kill people. And so for some reason, I guess it's just a change in mentality. Over about the last 8 months to a year, I've turned on more of the wanting to learn more about the medical side. So I actually have a much larger medical bag now that will be at the tournaments this year.
Of course.
But it's more,
well, you helped out,
all encompassing.
You helped out the last one as an EMT. I'm using the right term. Yeah.
So it's, we have at the tournaments, we have a dedicated EMT since I don't have the certification, but through law enforcement firefighting, I've done emergency first responder training, medical. Essentially, you are trained to package up a patient so that when EMS gets there, they can transport, collect as much data and information as you can. And so that's what I like to bring to it. I do the tournaments. I started out just because I truly respect our sensei and wanted to support him. But it also, going back to everything in my past, is if someone was to come in there, you have a room full of children.
I know. It's crazy, right?
You got to protect them. And so, being that it is properly posted, you can't carry a firearm if you're an average citizen. It's either hire a security guard, an armed security guard, or use police officers that have the ability legally to carry. So that's where, if I'm not there, there's another police officer that he uses to to do that. So
yeah, you got to make sure it's covered.
that's a big thing for me. And then the medical bag aspect of it, because kids get hurt in martial arts.
Well, they're fighting, so yeah, it's like a literal thing. We've seen that. Yeah,
that, and we have a few parents that we know have some medical conditions, so we gotta be aware and alert for that as well. So.
And parents can get angry with each other as well. That happens. I've seen that a few times in my career.
Yeah, luckily we've been able to prevent it from escalating to physical, but there are times where I could see it happening. So yeah, so that's been kind of my mindset lately, is moving more towards the medical side, learning even more, and growing that way, because my goal has always been in my career, and I guess that may be why I've got to do so much, is I've always wanted to learn. I've always wanted to do better than I have before. So as long as you always move forward and always trying to better yourself, and that's why I told my kids as they were growing up, I don't care what job you do. You can be a janitor. I don't care. Just be the best at it you can be, and always look for growth. Always try to learn more and become a better person, a better human being. So,
you know, what's his name? The actor. All right.
Matthew McConaughey.
Matthew McConaughey. I read his book. I have a whole thing on Matthew McConaughey. I love-hate relationship with that guy, but he does have a cool story where he was going to school for I think he was going to law school or something, and he's like, I want to be an actor. And so he had to call his dad and say, like, Dad, I'm gonna drop out of law school and go become an actor. And he's like calling his dad, I'm scared. And his dad was like, well, don't half-ass it. If you're gonna do it, do it.
I've never read that book, but that's the.
But I love that. I love that. I'm saying with my kids, I'm like, look, you guys can do whatever. You don't have to go to school.
Right.
You can whatever, but you have to do something. You have to wake up with purpose. Like, that's it. Like, you should wake up with purpose. And I think you're kind of halfway there. I mean, I feel like there's so many people that just don't have purpose, or they don't feel like they have purpose.
And that's where they get the monotony of the day in and day out.
Yeah.
You know, at least with law enforcement, firefighting, every day was kind of unique, and you dealt with different situations.
Circus. Yeah.
So it kind of keeps it interesting. But the purpose behind it, of when you truly get to see where you've helped somebody, when you fight a fire and bring somebody out of it, that's the times you're like, no, this is why I do this.
This is why I'm on this earth.
Despite all this other drama that happens where people dislike law enforcement, it's still, you have those people when you find them on their worst day, and you're able to be there to help them.
There are people, we all have good days and bad days. I've never been, well, my brother was one. So I when I was growing up, when I was a teenager, I was a skateboarder and a hooligan, and I hated the police. But then, I went to college, and my brother started doing some of that stuff, and I saw the other side of it. And now I'm sort of 50-50. I'm just kidding. I see both sides, and I don't ever fall on the side of law enforcement is just terrible.
And that's where I've tried to be that kind of police officer too, because I know that, well, A, nobody's perfect, but B, there are some that should not be police officers.
But that's everywhere.
And so, I've been the one that has actually reported
officers
for stuff. And that's kind of difficult on you, because then everybody starts looking at you as, are you just out here to get somebody, or what's your reasoning for it? But when you see somebody doing things that should not be happening, you've got to report it. And unfortunately, I can say that it took me about 2 months to build up the guts to do it. I got to the point where I was coming home, and when your kids are proud that you're a police officer, but
you're not.
Right.
I can't sleep with this.
I got to do something about it. So
you do have to lay your head on the pillow at night and sleep well. That's for sure.
And so I'm not one that, if something comes out, I'm not one, if I don't have all the information, you're not getting an opinion out of me.
Sure.
But also, I'm not one that automatically goes to somebody's defense. I'll give them benefit of the doubt, but we're going to look at these facts. Just because you're a police officer doesn't mean you're right. So there's got to be that balance. So I do see it from both sides. I do understand.
I think you have to. But that's a good lesson in just dealing with people too. You can't just trust somebody blindly, because, that's that person. So I just have to trust them. No, that's not how that works. That's how we get in trouble, I think. That's one of the things too. I don't want to get political at all, but we see this stuff, and I think we just put people on this pedestal so much. You see it on the internet, and dude, that dude's just a person.
Well, I can tell you from my time at Andrews Air Force Base that a lot of politicians will have a public persona and a private one. So that's why I don't trust individuals. I look at politics, I look at certain things and certain aspects, but as a person, I can't 100% I mean, I have the reasons I'm voting for certain people this year.
Mm-hmm.
And it's based on some things I've seen that are concerning to me as a
Mhm.
country, not because
Right.
this person or that person so but I can tell people with 100% certainty they're different in front of the camera than they are behind the scenes. So
Yeah, especially if you've seen it. It's like,
and that's really why I don't like politics just in general.
yeah, it's
'Cause
dirty, man.
It is
It's so dirty.
And the sense of entitlement some people have that go along with it. I can't deal with it.
It rubs me the wrong way.
We're
For sure.
all people. We're no different than each other. We have different, aspects that we're better than others, but doesn't mean you look down on people. It doesn't mean you treat them differently.
And they do.
Mhm.
And they
Very
do.
much so.
I will say though, we invoked his name early, but if it ever came out that Jocko had some shit, it would probably crush me.
Yeah,
I'm surprised I'm not even wearing. I would usually wear one of his shirts.
he seems pretty straightforward.
I think so.
Very
but like,
abrupt.
I would probably be crushed.
Which, I mean, you initially want to go with he's a Navy SEAL, so you want to give him credit.
But
But
I've
I've seen
seen
some
enough.
other Navy SEALs
Yeah.
that get involved with stuff.
I've
But
seen some stuff.
he seems pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Straight up guy.
I think so. Well, man, I've enjoyed this.
I have to.
I hope you have too. Sometimes these podcasts can be therapeutic.
They are.
You were asking me earlier, like what got you into it, but it's literally this.
Yeah.
Like it always feels really good when you're done talking.
Well, I wasn't sure what we were going to get into today, and
Me
so
either.
Part of what I was hoping to was the mental aspect of it, the
Yeah.
PTSD, and trying to encourage people to seek help
That's
instead
a good.
of shying
That's
away
good.
from it.
That's
So
good.
I was very glad we were able to get into that today.
Heck yeah, brother.
So
Well, thank you for coming out, man. We'll do it again.
I appreciate
There's still a bunch there that we haven't really gotten into, but I appreciate it.
yes, sir. Thank you.